now to Congress that we should be issuing resolutions to what the monetary policy that the Fed should be doing? If so, I'm sure there's a lot of members who would like to engage in it.
Well, I hear lots of advice from congressmen, but if this let me say, could I say the bottom line here, yes, though, is that we've done a lot of work on this. We've gotten a lot of requests from individual congressmen for our views and for our analysis. It was not the intent of that white paper to provide a set of recommendations. There was not a list of recommendations at the end of the white paper. We were trying to provide pros and cons, analysis, background. I'm sorry if you think we went too far, but we tried to provide useful information.
But within 24 hours after that paper out, you know, the New York Fed president was out there basically advocating for some of the positions in there. Governor Elizabeth Duke was out there basically advocating for some positions out there. So you can't be on both sides of the issue where we're just saying this is what we think, and then the Fed president, the governor's coming out there saying, advocating. No. And if it's because you're saying that members were asking your opinion, well, we were asking your opinion, and we would have certainly liked to have seen a white paper back when the president's colossal failure with the stimulus was going through, and we certainly would have liked a white paper at that time from the Fed to say just how that would have all worked out. Why didn't we see a white paper at that time spelling out whether this would work and whether you advocate or didn't advocate for the...
Well, again, I know you're skeptical, but we are trying very hard to avoid encroaching on Congress's fiscal responsibilities. With respect to the points you made about Governor Duke and President Dudley, they are not representing any official position of the board. They're speaking on their own recognizance. If you pay attention to the speeches that Reserve Bank presidents give, you know there's a wide variety of opinion, even on monetary policy. So there was no official endorsement of those positions. We are, again, trying to provide useful background. I apologize if it was misinterpreted. Again, our goal was just to be helpful.
Well, I guess I would just sort of take off of what the chairman was talking about. You have two mandates in the area of employment, the area of monetary policy, and that's obviously a lot for the Fed to be responsible for. We have a mandate in the area of fiscal policy, and we would like to retain that. Let me then go to another area. You do have a responsibility as the position that you have. Well, you're the owner of about $1 trillion right now of mortgage-backed securities, right? In that position of the owner, wearing that hat, can you comment then on the President's new proposal on the refi plan? What have you looked into that? What would the impact be as far as realized losses to the balance sheet if that plan was to go through?
No, we haven't done that specific calculation, and once again, I'm not going to endorse or not endorse a specific program.
What is the cost if we were to do that?
There are costs, as the President acknowledged. There are costs to it, and they would have to be raised somehow, whether it's from a bank tax or some other way. He mentioned $5 to $10 billion. We haven't looked at that number. We don't know if it's correct or not. There would also be costs to investors,
right, and
including the Federal Reserve.
You're the investor in this
Yes.
situation. You bought these things, some would say, at a premium. So not to the cost to the taxpayer, but your cost. Have you begun to look to see what your cost would be as the loss realized on those?
No, we haven't, although we acknowledge, I think it should be acknowledged that, that the rates of refinance have been extremely low, lower than expected over the last couple of years. And so in some sense, that is reversing a gain that we got. But you're right, there are costs to the program, there are costs potentially to investors, and there's costs to the government potentially. So
that
yes.
would be one area that we would like to have a specific information back on, and also as a regulator, what the impact would be for the banks that you regulate, what the impact would be if you increase the fees on them. And I see my time is out, but I'd like that information. Thank you, Mr.
Back
Chairman.
to Mr. Doggett.
Let me just return to the last question, and that is, many economists would think that unemployment of 5.2 to 6% leaves many people out there hurting badly in an economy, is a fairly substantial rate of unemployment, even though it's much, much better than where we are today. In setting your goals of trying to assure, to avoid excessive price instability and inflation, you have not taken a drastic position on unemployment. You've tried to have some, as you said, balance between the two, have you not?
Well, we are not, there's nothing in our statement which suggests that we think that 5.2 to 6% unemployment is desirable or is a good outcome. We're just saying that given where the economy is today, that's what we think it can sustain under more normal conditions. There are many policies that Congress could consider. workforce skills and other things that might affect that long-run unemployment. And if that unemployment rate has changed, then we will respond to that.
And on your estimates of what type of growth we will see in the near term in the economy that are in your testimony and the reports of the Fed, what assumptions do those estimates make concerning fiscal policy and where the Congress will be? I understand you're not getting into specific bills, pro and con.
Well, in order to make forecasts, we make guesses about what Congress will actually do. There's no endorsement or non-endorsement involved in that. Basically, the CBO presented sort of two kind of extreme proposals. One is the current law proposal, which assumes, for example, that all the tax cuts are ended and that the doc fix is not adopted and so on. And then there was a alternative scenario which sort of took the most
Right. We had testimony about both yesterday.
yeah, which assumed that there was no sequestration and that all the tax cuts were extended and you know, so it took the opposite approach. Our numbers obviously are based on an intermediate level, assumes that some of these policies are undertaken, but not all of them, and we try to make our best guess. But it's only staff guesses about what they think Congress may do, and I don't think those forecasts are, the details of that are particularly helpful to you. I mean, you obviously you're going to be trying to figure out what the right thing to do is.
With regard to an issue we've discussed when you've been here in the committee before on whether the policies of the financial community concerning rewards and compensation for taking excessive risk remain a problem, you've finally issued a report in October dealing with that. It indicated that there had been some improvement, but among the largest banks there continued to be a number of problems with regard to risk-taking and how that leads to rewards from some of those that are taking the risk with other people's money. Could you give us an assessment of what's happened since that report came out in terms of what progress is being made to deal with this issue that many of us are concerned could lead to another financial meltdown?
Well, the Federal Reserve undertook, even before financial reform was passed by the Congress, we undertook to look at this as a safety and soundness matter. And very early on, we began working with the boards and the compensation committees of the major institutions to try to structure their compensation in ways that did not lead to more or excessive risk-taking. And I think, as the report suggested, we made a good bit of progress. It's really sort of about that time of year when a lot of this information is finalized in terms of what the compensation packages are going to look like. We continue to make progress on that. We continue to work with the banks. I think that, as I said, I think that a lot of the major institutions have taken serious steps in this direction. I would point out, in addition, that beyond the actions that the Federal Reserve took independently, Dodd-Frank requires the Fed and other bank regulators to establish incentive compensation standards, and that rulemaking process is underway, and so that will augment and add to the guidance that we've already provided. So we have seen progress, and we continue to work actively with the banks to, I think in everyone's interest, to make the banks safer and reduce the risks to the taxpayer.
Does more need to be done?
Well, we continue to work on it. As we said in our report, we don't think that we're where we need to be necessarily, and I think that there's a lot of interesting questions. This is actually an active topic of academic research about how best to structure pay packages, what kinds of, what role should options and stock payments and so on play. So more does need to be done, but I think part of the process will be learning in our consultations with the institutions and with academics and others about what works best. And of course, Europeans are doing similar things in this interchange there as well.
Thank you. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here today and for your testimony and comments. I've been a member of this committee, and I think the chairman has also, for 8 years now. And for 8 years, we've had economists and other experts come and tell us that we have a structural deficit problem that is unsustainable and we need to do something about it. So far, we failed to heed the warning. We are now at a situation where I think if we don't heed the warning, there's going to be consequences to play that nobody is willing to accept. And the sad thing about it is that both parties, Republicans and Democrats, sit and demonize one another no matter what we try to do to address this problem. We call the Democrats just tax and spend liberals that don't care about the economy, and they try to show us pictures of Paul Ryan pushing Grandma off the cliff. Unfortunately, that doesn't solve the problem. When everyone in this room, everyone listening to us, and everyone on this committee knows what has to be done. We've had several commissions that have looked at what needs to be done. They all say, almost universally, that you've got to get to $4 to $6 trillion in savings if you're going to have an impact on the long-term deficit of this country, whether it's Simpson Bowles, Domenici-Revlin, the Gang of Six, or whatever. We all know that we've got to restrain discretionary spending. We all know that we've got to get entitlements under control. And we all know that we need a pro-growth tax policy in this country instead of a 19th century tax code, one that fits the 21st century. We all know that. We might have some differences of exactly how to do some of these things, but we all know that the problem exists, and we all know we've got to come together. What we need is an armistice between Republicans and Democrats to solve this problem, because if we don't, all of these other things we talk about aren't really going to matter, are they?
That's correct. It is, I think, striking that when the U.S. Debt was downgraded by S&P last summer, it was more about what they cited was the political concerns about the ability of the Congress to work effectively to make progress. So it's easy for me to say. Obviously, I recognize that politics is a tough game and that there are a lot of disagreements in Congress, but obviously the more that can be done to show cooperation and collaboration on this very important issue. I think we all agree on the issue, as you say, so I hope very much that...
I was surprised that this last 1st of January, I was in New Zealand and Australia and the Philippines, and talking with officials there and businesses there, I was surprised that they are really watching Congress. They're worried about Congress's inability to get together to solve this problem because they know that the problem is going to extend to them if we don't solve our problem here. And I was surprised that they follow us as closely as they do. But let me ask you, do you believe that the general assumption that we have to get to $4 to $6 trillion in savings is the right number, or a number that will stabilize our deficit and get us headed in the right direction? And could you paint a picture, because it's sometimes hard for us to explain to the public what could potentially happen if we don't do anything. Could you paint a picture for us of what you think will happen to this economy if we don't take the steps necessary to stabilize our debt, and if we put it off for another year or another year after that, as we've been kicking that can down the road forever?
The $4 to $6 trillion, Congressman, was a number that was talked about for the next decade. Right. And the idea was that achieving that would stabilize the debt-GDP ratio and maybe get some progress there. And I was supportive of going big, so to speak, when we were discussing all these issues. We, the country, were discussing these issues last summer. So yes, you know, I think a very substantial additional attack on the deficits is needed. But the other point I would make is that the $4 trillion, the $6 trillion number is, again, is about the next decade. Right. The biggest problems we have are beyond the next decade. They stretch out into the next 20 or 30 years as entitlement costs in particular begin to rise further and as our demographics begin to move, I guess some would say adversely. So one thing I would urge you as you think about these issues is not just to focus only on the 10-year official budget window, but to think about the longer term, even beyond 10 years, because what we've seen, an example would be the Social Security reform that was done in the early 80s, which is still phasing in. It's not even all phased in yet, 30 years later. The more time you give people, the slower the process, the more warning, the more likely it's going to be successful, both politically and economically. So you need to look beyond 10 years. In terms of the implications for the economy, I think the good scenario is that, you know, we have, when the economy recovers, that we have higher interest rates, we have higher borrowing abroad, we have a slower growing economy, slower productivity gains, et cetera. As I discussed in my testimony, the bad case scenario, which ultimately will